All right, another vocal video. This one on restricted codes. This is from Chapter 5 of Patsy Rdnbrg's The Need for Words, where I'm going through the exercises one by one, just making a video as I go of the exercise, see how I do, see if it's going to be of any use to me. This one I did, the last one was elaborated codes, which is basically using dictionary English, where anyone who's got access to a dictionary should be able to understand what you say. This would be something I think about, like a news reader on a television show would, on a news show would probably adopt. You want everything to be explicable to anyone watching it, or if they didn't understand a word, they should be able to look it up in a dictionary. And we did an exercise of explain something using that code. This time it is restricted codes, and restricted codes are codes that are used more informally. So they're, it's sort of slang between like a certain group of people, or it's a technical jargon where you're using for kind of very specific thing. She makes a point in here of doctors, saying that doctors and how they talk about the human body is one way of saying, surely doctors often relish the fact that the patient has no idea what is being talked about. Our bodies are being described in language we cannot always understand. So I guess the idea that medical language is sort of a power play, versus, I think there's part of it is power play, and part of it is needing to be more precise than what regular elaborated English can probably allow. So, it's interesting that she does that versus, when actors talk about restricted TV and theater code, indecipherable to the uninitiated, suddenly it's a priesthood for that. But doctors are relishing how they get to be outside of the thing. But also just having shorthand for when you are working. And she makes the point, because this is when this was written. One of the reasons we see such a great preponderance of new dictionaries in bookshops these days is because of the greater insistence of code languages becoming common parlance. So I guess of being actually able to use your restricted code and expect other people to understand it, not just accept that, like, oh, it's only between a particular small group. Could be as small as two people, could be just your block, could be your profession. Um, but obviously this nowadays, I think, is everybody uses their Google is their friend to figure out, well, what does that mean, and Googling it. And that's how things quickly can become common language, can get adopted. They're saying, like, restricted codes can move into common parlance, like computer language, once very restricted, has entered elaborated forms, saying that, like, a lot of sailing and shipwright language, navigational codes became common in the English language around the 18th century as the Navy and the Empire grew, ruling the waves. We embraced the language of the Navy. So yeah, that's where it became the powerful thing. So the exercise here is allow each person in a group to speak versions of 3 restricted codes that each has used and knows well. It will be a very rich experience for the whole group to both listen and to try and decipher what is said. And it might range from professional jargon to street language. So I don't have a group. No one's going to be able to I don't have anyone to react to. I think if I was going to use the two, one would be BookTube, where we often talk about our TBRs, where there are galleys, where there is stuff that is specific to BookTube, tags, being tagged in a video, channels, creators, things like that. Uh, and maybe there's specific things even into BookTube of talking about tropes, and well, that's not specific to, but oftentimes things get talked about, like tropes, or a DNF, a lot of acronyms which get sprinkled in. And actually the other kind of restricted code I would expect I would know would be professionally, as a as a carer at a group home. We use initials for all of the in documents for when we use initials when we're talking outside of daily logs for talking about residents. There are, yes, more acronyms. There's MPR, monthly progress report. There's various things like that that probably come into into the realm that way. So yeah, there's definitely restricted codes. There's also just a sort of thing of personal shorthand, where we'll say like, oh, that guy, in that place, and someone who you're talking to will know what you're talking about. That the guy with the hat. Oh, the guy with the hat. Oh yeah, wasn't he just or if I say hooped is a particular slang which could have quite a disgusting meaning to it, but is something I know from the Okanagan, and my partner was not aware of and just thought I was making up something. But we've seen other people who actually also use hooped, so it's just not a personal code of one in here. It's more than that. So yeah, those are examples of restricted codes in my thing. I don't know if it's not particularly a exercise that I think I need to come up with, because it's funny how would be funny to listen to other people talk in restricted codes, and I'm sure people do. And you're like, what are they saying? I think about a lot of slang. There's a lot of youth culture slang. There's a lot of text speak, which can be restricted code stuff. Though it's interesting, what is restricted code? Because if the elaborated code is something you can look up, well, thanks to the internet, restricted codes are more and more available. I can, like, someone says something, it's like, oh, what does that mean? And I can look it up. I can look it up on my phone. I've got the magic box at my availability, which probably means there's a preponderance of restricted codes, and people are much more comfortable speaking in those codes. It's interesting though, when you get to public speaking, there is an expectation on a certain level of formality that you're clear in what you're saying, though depends on what your audience is. You might be making a video just for a very particular audience, for people who are under 14 and know everything about some cool video game. My mind goes to Minecraft. That's probably something for 40-year-olds by now. But so you have all these frames of reference, and you're quite happy just speaking in restricted code for that audience, because that audience will get you. And indeed, that's a bit of a passport into that audience. Unless you have a face of a 50-year-old, then a 14-year-old would react very negatively to probably you using the restricted code that should only be accessible to a 14-year-old born of a certain time and a certain experience. And then thus that we have to abandon that code because this loser here is using it. So yeah, that is Patsy Rdnbrg on elaborated and restricted codes. And I think the next thing we're going into, she also talked about using cliche, which is cliche a code, or is that simply, well, it's a kind of code. And it probably goes into her thing of watering down and not saying much about language. There's the idea of expanding, of bloating the language by avoiding using something like, I think in Love's Labor's Lost, instead of using afternoon, they use the posterior of the day. What's it? The posterior of the day, which is apparently the afternoon for these dudes in Love's Labor's Lost. So so on a daily basis, we all probably speak in restricted codes than elaborated ones. We can effortlessly shift codes perhaps 20 times throughout a day. The richer our lives, the more codes we acquire, and the more flexibility of our use of words. I guess that's the more people you know, the more you flip between. And I mean, that could be class code, I guess, as well. Of when you're speaking to people who are above you, you speak a certain way. When you're speaking to people below you, you speak a certain way. And when you're speaking to people who are of your same economic class, you probably speak a certain way. The richer our lives, the more codes we acquire, and the more flexible our use of words. This flexibility may mean we can understand a code, but not convincingly speak it. The stumbling block usually comes when we have to speak a text. If this shift in everyday speaking is so easy, then why do we find it so hard to change and communicate different codes when speaking a text? Which, are we speaking a text, or are we just having a conversation? Because having a conversation, and I may be unclear on that point. All right, that is this vocal video. I need to get to going to work. Undoubtedly, I am not doing too bad. All right, I've been Jay. More videos later.